Part 1. The Ultimatum. My husband handed me an ultimatum in front of 40 guests. Beg him to stay married or walk out the door. He wanted tears. He wanted a scene. He wanted, more than anything, to watch me fall apart so everyone in that room would remember whose name kept the lights on. He didn't get any of that. I set my wine glass down, climbed the stairs, packed one bag I had already half filled weeks earlier, and left through the front door without raising my voice. What he never understood was that I hadn't packed that night out of panic. I'd been packing, quietly, for almost 5 years. Stay with me, because the moment he thought he'd won was the exact moment everything he owned started to come apart. My name is Naomi Ferris. I was 36, and to every person who knew us, I looked like a woman who couldn't survive a month without her husband's income. Grant Whitfield made sure of that impression. At holidays, at his office parties, at dinners with his clients, he had a favorite line: "Naomi wouldn't last 2 weeks without me." People laughed. I laughed along with them. That laugh was the most convincing performance of my life. The truth was nothing like the joke. Every weekday at 4 in the morning, while Grant slept soundly beside me, I sat in the guest room with a laptop and a cup of coffee going cold. Slowly, without telling a single soul, I had built a consulting practice. One client turned into 4. 4 turned into a dozen. Piece by piece, I assembled a version of my life that didn't need his signature on anything. When he mocked what he called my little side hustle, I smiled and said nothing. His disinterest was the safest cover I could have asked for. The less he looked, the more room I had to build. Then came the dinner party that changed everything. Grant had invited coworkers, clients, a few old college friends. The food came out, the wine kept pouring, the conversation stayed easy, until Grant had one drink too many and decided the evening needed a punchline. He pointed at me across the table. If I ever left this woman, she'd be back on my doorstep inside a week. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Then his eyes found mine. "Right, babe?" For the first time in 11 years of marriage, I didn't smile. The room went quiet. Grant noticed immediately. He always noticed when the audience stopped laughing. He leaned back, smug, testing me. "What, you upset?" I said. "No." Then he said the sentence that ended everything between us. "If you're so unhappy, there's the door." He meant it as a dare. He thought I'd back down the way I always had. He had no idea I'd already chosen which suitcase to grab. Part 2. A life already waiting. Everyone at that table watched me stand up. Nobody followed me upstairs. 15 minutes later, I came back down with a single packed bag and a thick envelope, which I set in the center of the table, right next to the dessert plates. Divorce papers. I turned around and walked out while nervous laughter tried to fill the silence behind me. Grant thought I was bluffing. He always thought that. What he didn't know, what nobody in that dining room knew, was that I wasn't driving off to find a hotel or call a friend for a couch to sleep on. I already had somewhere to go. 20 minutes after I pulled out of our driveway, I parked outside a mid-rise apartment building on the other side of the city. I'd signed that lease 9 months earlier. The apartment was already furnished. Dishes in the cabinets, clothes in the closet, a small office set up in the second bedroom with a desk, a second monitor, and a filing cabinet full of years of invoices Grant had never once asked to see. When I unlocked that door and stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Quiet. This wasn't an impulsive exit. It was the final move in a plan I had been assembling, carefully and privately, for nearly 5 years. Every dollar saved, every contract signed at 4 in the morning while my husband slept. Every night I stayed up long after he'd gone to bed, building something he thought was a hobby. All of it had been leading here. By morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends wanted the story. Some assumed I'd made a rash decision I'd regret by the weekend. Others assumed I'd already be back home, apologizing. One message came from Grant. 3 words: "Stop being dramatic." I didn't answer. Over the following days, more messages landed, some angry, some demanding, none of them containing anything close to an apology. Then my attorney called with an update that didn't surprise me at all. Grant was refusing to sign. He was telling everyone the same story. "She'll come crawling back within a month." He said it at lunches. He said it in meetings. He believed, completely, that I couldn't function without him, and that belief made him careless. Confident people stopped paying attention to the details. Meanwhile, I got to work. Every morning I sat at my new desk and moved my life, piece by piece, out of his reach. New bank accounts, updated addresses, business records transferred to my name alone. No panic, no announcements, just steady, methodical progress. A few weeks in, something small but strange began happening on Grant's end. A handful of his clients started asking questions nobody expected them to ask, and once people start asking questions, they rarely stop at just one. Part 3. The first. Cracks. The questions Grant's clients were asking weren't dramatic. Nobody was accusing him of anything. They wanted reassurance about timelines. They wanted clarity on a project that had gone quiet for 2 weeks. They wanted to know if a promised call was still happening. Small things. The kind of things that don't matter until enough of them pile up at once. Grant noticed the shift before he understood it. One night he called me, and I could hear the edge in his voice before he even said, "Hello. Have you been talking to my clients?" I almost laughed. I told him no, and he didn't believe me, but it was the truth. I hadn't spoken to a single one of them. I didn't need to. People were simply starting to notice things they had ignored for years. The cracks in Grant's business had always been there. Missed follow-ups, half-finished promises, a habit of overselling and under-delivering. I had watched those cracks form for over a decade. Now, with no one covering for him at home, they were becoming visible to everyone else too. He blamed bad luck. He blamed a slow season. He blamed difficult clients who apparently couldn't be pleased. He blamed everyone except the one variable that had actually changed. He no longer had a wife quietly smoothing things over, calming nervous clients at dinner parties, laughing off his missed deadlines as charming disorganization. Sitting on my new balcony that night, looking out at a skyline that wasn't attached to his name, I let myself smile for the first time in weeks. The divorce papers were still unsigned. Grant still believed I'd be home within the month. But I knew something he didn't. The first domino had already tipped over, and a second one was beginning to lean. Once I'd settled into the apartment, I finally had space to think about how I'd gotten there. Most people, including Grant, assumed I'd walked away from the marriage with nothing but a suitcase and a grudge. The truth was almost the opposite. Years earlier, I'd realized a simple, uncomfortable fact. No one was coming to rescue me. If I wanted out, I would have to build my own exit, brick by brick, without anyone's permission, least of all his. So I started small. 4 a.m, laptop open, one client, barely any income, exhausted before the sun came up most days. There were mornings I questioned whether it was worth it. I kept going anyway. While Grant watched television, I studied contracts. While he relaxed on weekends, I built systems and chased referrals. I gave up vacations, gave up sleep, gave up the version of myself that used to ask permission. Slowly, quietly, that sacrifice started to add up into something Grant never saw coming. Part 4. What he never noticed. One client became 5. 5 became 15. Referrals started arriving on their own. Then bigger contracts followed. Then opportunities I'd never dared imagine when I first opened that laptop at 4 a.m. And through all of it, Grant noticed nothing. Not because I hid it perfectly, because he never bothered to ask. Whenever he caught me working, he assumed it was a hobby. Whenever I took a call in the office, he barely glanced up from his phone. Business emails landed in my inbox at all hours, and he never once wondered who they were from. His attention, as always, stayed fixed on himself. I remember one trip he took to Denver for a supposed big meeting. He spent 4 days posting pictures from rooftop restaurants and a hotel pool. While he was gone, I signed the largest contract my consulting practice had ever landed, an agreement that alone would bring in more than most people make in a year. When he came home, he talked about his trip for 2 straight hours and never once asked what I'd been up to. That became the pattern of our marriage. Month after month, year after year, my company grew while my husband looked the other way. Eventually, my business was clearing 6 figures annually. I had savings, investments, a financial floor. Grant swore, publicly and often, that I could never build without him standing under me. The irony still catches me sometimes. The man who told every room he ever stood in that I depended on him completely had no idea I'd already built an entire life that didn't include him. His own arrogance blinded him. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, a quiet wife, dependent and grateful. He was wrong on every count. I was never trapped. I was never waiting for his permission. I was waiting for the right moment to leave. When that moment finally came, I didn't hesitate. A few months after I moved out, small problems started surfacing in Grant's business. A prospective client picked a competitor instead. A meeting got pushed, then pushed again, then quietly canceled. A referral that should have come through never did. None of it looked serious on its own. Together, it started to add pressure he couldn't explain. He refused to look inward. When something went wrong, he found someone else to blame. Word reached me, through mutual friends, that he'd spent nearly an hour yelling at one of his managers over a lost deal. A week later, another opportunity fell through, and this time he blamed competitors for spreading lies. Then another problem. And another. Longtime business partners started asking for more updates, more reassurance, more paperwork before committing to anything. Nothing dramatic, just enough hesitation to make people cautious. The confidence Grant had always leaned on was starting, very quietly, to erode. Part 5. Why I Stayed So Long. People sometimes ask if Grant was abusive. The honest answer is complicated. He never raised a hand to me. He never threw anything, never screamed at the top of his lungs. From the outside, our marriage looked ordinary. Some days it even looked happy. That's exactly why so few people understood why I finally left. The damage wasn't loud. It arrived in small pieces, spread across years. One offhand comment at a time, always wrapped in a smile so it wouldn't sound like what it actually was. Every joke carried the same quiet message. Naomi needs me. Naomi can't manage without me. Naomi would be lost on her own. At first I brushed it off. Eventually, without quite noticing, I started to believe pieces of it. That was the dangerous part. Say something often enough and it starts sounding like fact. I still remember standing beside him at a company function years earlier. Someone asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Grant jumped in with a laugh. She dabbles in little projects while I pay for everything. The room laughed. I laughed too. That night I cried in the bathroom, not because the joke stung, but because I realized no one, not even my own husband, expected me to have a real answer. Moments like that repeated for years, small enough to shrug off in the moment, sharp enough to remember a decade later. My confidence shrank, my world shrank, my ambitions shrank. Grant either never noticed, or noticed and quietly preferred it that way. Either way, the result was the same. That's why leaving took so long. People imagine strength as one dramatic moment. Mine was built slowly, one client at a time. Every contract I signed rebuilt a little piece of confidence. Every dollar I earned bought a little more freedom. I wasn't slow to leave because I was weak. I was slow because I was determined to leave safely, on my own terms, with a life already waiting on the other side. Here's the truth that took me the longest to admit. By the time I finally packed that bag, I had stopped loving Grant years earlier. Not weeks before, not months, years. Love doesn't vanish in a single ugly night. It fades slowly, under the weight of every dismissal, every joke made at my expense, every reminder that he saw me as less than himself. What was left by the end wasn't love, it was habit, obligation, a quiet, low-grade fear of disrupting a life that looked fine from the outside. Once those things fell away, there was nothing left worth protecting. The marriage didn't end the night I set those divorce papers on the table. It had ended long before that. I simply stayed until I was ready to walk out the door for good. Part 6. The empire starts to wobble. Months after I left, my life felt lighter in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I woke up without a knot in my chest. My client list kept growing. My days were full but calm. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building, on purpose, in the open. Grant, meanwhile, was not doing well. At first, the updates I heard through mutual contacts were minor. A missed meeting here, a delayed project there, a frustrated employee venting after hours. Then the updates got heavier. His company was losing its footing, not all at once, but in steady pieces. The confidence he'd always worn so easily was starting to slip. He still refused to admit there was a real problem. Then one morning, everything shifted. A major client, one of his biggest, walked away completely. Not delayed, not renegotiated, gone. The financial hit was immediate and impossible to spin. For the first time, Grant couldn't laugh it off in front of a room. People said he shut himself in his office for hours that day. No jokes, no bravado, just silence. That same afternoon, my phone rang and his name showed up on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered anyway. His voice sounded different, lower, unsteady. "Naomi, we need to talk." No anger this time. No performance. Just something I'd genuinely never heard from him before. Worry. I kept my voice even. "What do you want, Grant?" He hesitated so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, "It's falling apart and I don't understand why." I didn't rush to fill the silence. I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. "I thought maybe you'd know something," he added, and that's when I understood. He wasn't scared of losing money. He was scared of losing control, maybe for the first time in his adult life. "I don't know anything about your business," I told him, calm and flat. He paused again, like he was waiting for me to soften, to slip back into the role he'd always assigned me, the reassuring wife, smoothing over his messes. I didn't. There was nothing left in me to give him. After another long silence, he asked, quietly, "Are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was profound, but because it arrived about 5 years too late. "Yes," I said, one word, no explanation needed, just true. He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "I never actually knew you," he said. Then the line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, aware that something in him had just quietly collapsed. Part 7. What the investigators found. After that phone call, Grant stopped, sleeping well. He kept replaying my voice in his head, not angry, not emotional, just distant. That distance unsettled him more than any argument ever could have. Days later, he did something he never would have considered before. He hired private investigators. He told himself it was just to understand what had changed. Underneath that excuse, though, he wanted answers about the person he thought he'd been married to for 11 years. The investigators started quietly, pulling records, tracing financial history, checking business filings. What they found didn't add up the way Grant expected. He sat in his office reading the first report, expecting a short summary. Instead, he sat frozen. My name appeared again and again. Property holdings, not one but several, purchased over the years in different cities, all legally owned, all carefully managed. Then came the financial records, investment accounts, business assets, private contracts stretching back years. Grant read line after line, his expression sliding from confusion to disbelief to something closer to shock. None of it was new. All of it had existed the entire time we were married. While he was joking about my little side hustle, while he was convinced I couldn't survive a month without his income, I had real clients, real contracts, and a business with real value humming quietly in the background of our life together. My consulting practice wasn't small. It was structured, established, growing, and completely invisible to the one person who never bothered to look. The investigators noted one more detail that mattered more than any of the numbers. There was no evidence I had ever actually been financially dependent on him, not even in our earliest years together. Grant pushed the folder away and said nothing for a long time. His mind kept trying to reject what was right in front of him, but the facts didn't move. Slowly, the truth settled in. Naomi had never been trapped. She had been building, carefully, patiently, for years, while standing right beside him, completely unnoticed. That realization hit harder than any lost contract ever could. Money can be earned back, business relationships can be rebuilt, but his understanding of the person he'd married had been wrong from the very beginning, and there was no rebuilding that. The confidence he'd carried so effortlessly for years began to crumble, not because his company was struggling, though it was, but because he finally understood the size of what he'd underestimated. The woman he'd spent a decade dismissing had been more capable than he ever imagined, and by the time he saw it clearly, there was nothing left to do about it. Tard 8. Losing control. After the investigators' report landed, everything in Grant's life started to feel unsteady. At first he tried to push through it, still showing up to meetings, still taking calls, still performing the same confidence he'd worn for years, but something underneath had already given way. The pressure kept building from every direction. Clients wanted reassurance he could no longer offer convincingly. Projects slowed down. Deadlines slipped. For the first time, the people around him started to notice, really notice, and they didn't like what they saw. Employees who used to speak well of him began leaving quietly. One resignation turned into 2, then 5, then entire teams losing their footing. Grant tried everything to stop the bleeding. Raises, promotions, late-night pep talks meant to keep people loyal. None of it worked the way it used to. Something fundamental had shifted, and people no longer trusted the version of him they'd bought into for years. His business partners pulled back too. They wanted things in writing. They avoided long-term commitments. Every conversation felt heavier than it used to, every decision more uncertain. Grant hated all of it, and that frustration curdled fast into anger. He started blaming everyone in reach. His staff was incompetent, his partners were disloyal, his competitors were playing dirty. None of it was true, and none of it fixed anything. If anything, it made things worse. His temper shortened by the week. Small mistakes triggered outsized reactions. Simple conversations turned into confrontations. People started avoiding him in the hallways of his own company. What Grant refused to see was the simplest explanation of all. Nothing outside of him had changed nearly as much as he believed. The real shift was internal. His ego, his refusal to admit he might have misjudged the person he married, his inability to accept that his grip on the situation had never been as strong as he assumed. That mindset shaped every decision that followed. Instead of solving problems carefully, he rushed into half-formed fixes. Instead of listening to advice, he overruled it. Instead of rebuilding the trust he'd lost, he kept pushing people further away. Each choice created a new problem, and each new problem added more weight to a structure that was already straining. The company he'd always been so proud of was no longer stable. It was shaking from the inside, and Grant still believed, right up until he couldn't anymore, that he was the one holding it together. I stayed completely out of it. I didn't interfere, didn't reach out, didn't need to. The truth was simple. Grant wasn't being sabotaged by anyone. He was undone by the one thing he could never see clearly, himself. Part 9. The Last Domino. The divorce moved forward slowly but steadily after that. Paperwork exchanged hands. Lawyers spoke. There was no more room left for delay. It was reaching its end. For the first time in his life, Grant felt something he'd never expected to feel. Real loss. Not just of money or status, but of me. That realization changed his approach completely. He started trying to reach me again. Small attempts at first. A text here, a missed call there. Then, it became more direct. He asked to meet in person. I said no. He didn't stop asking. Eventually, he went through the lawyers to formally request one final conversation. I agreed, but only on my terms, my attorney present, a public setting, no surprises. When we finally sat across from each other, I barely recognized the man in front of me. The confidence that used to fill every room he walked into was gone. His voice was lower, uncertain, almost rushed. I made mistakes, he said. I know that now. He explained himself the way people do when it's already too late. Pressure, misunderstanding, things he claimed he hadn't realized he had until they were gone. Then came the promises. He'd change, he'd do better. He even floated the idea of trying again, as if what we'd had could simply be reassembled. I let him finish without interrupting, because I'd already heard every version of this apology, not in words, but in actions, for over a decade. Every joke at my expense in front of a crowded room. Every time he dismissed what I said like it carried no weight. Those were the real truths of our marriage. This apology, polished and rehearsed, wasn't. When he finished, he looked at me the way someone looks when they're waiting for absolution. Hope in his eyes, waiting for a softening, a pause, any sign I might reconsider. I gave him nothing, because I had already made peace with everything, long before that conversation ever happened. I don't need promises, Grant, I said, calm and even. I needed respect. The room went silent. He blinked, clearly not expecting those particular words. For the first time in our entire relationship, he had nothing clever to say back. No joke, no excuse, no confidence left to hide behind. The reality finally landed. I wasn't coming back. Not out of anger, out of certainty. Something in him gave way completely in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the same way everything else about his unraveling had happened. One overlooked detail at a time, until it was simply too late to stop. Part 10. 1 year later. A year later, my life looks almost nothing like it used to. The apartment I moved into as an escape has become, genuinely, my home. My business isn't quietly growing in the background anymore. It's thriving out in the open. New clients sign on every month. Bigger contracts follow. My team has grown from just me to a real staff. I don't work in silence anymore. I work with purpose. More than anything, something inside me shifted for good. My confidence isn't the performance I used to put on for Grant's benefit. It's something steadier now, something real. I no longer measure my worth through anyone else's approval. I no longer second-guess decisions I know are right. I no longer make myself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. For the first time in years, I get to just be myself, without an audience to manage. Grant's path went somewhere very different. I don't follow his life closely, but news still finds me occasionally through people we both used to know. His company never fully stabilized. His reputation took a hit it hasn't recovered from. The confidence he used to wear like armor is gone. People say he's changed, just not in the way he probably hoped. The man who once stood in a room full of guests and promised everyone I'd come crawling back is, from what I hear, now the one hoping he'd handled things differently. There's an irony in that I can't ignore, but I don't feel anger about it anymore. Just distance. Peaceful distance. One evening not long ago, I sat by my window and let myself think back through all of it. The humiliation, the years of quiet planning, the night I finally walked out, and everything that followed. And I understood something clearly, maybe for the first time. Silence is never empty. It isn't weakness, and it isn't nothing. Silence can be preparation. It can be patience. It can be strategy. Sometimes it's simply the calm before a complete change in someone's life. Grant never saw me leaving, even though I'd been leaving for years before I actually walked out the door. Not because I was invisible, because he assumed I would always just stay. That single assumption cost him everything. The night he told me to beg or get out, he thought he held every card in his hand. He thought the power in that room belonged entirely to him. In reality, he had just knocked over the first domino without even realizing it, and once it fell, nothing he did afterward could stop the rest from following. If you've ever felt underestimated by someone who was supposed to know you best, I hope this reminds you of something important. Quiet isn't the same as powerless. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone building an exit nobody else can see yet.